Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to ESOF 2020 here in Trieste. My name is Stephen Taylor. I'm Director of Innovation and Complex Systems in ARIA Science Park, located here in the city of Trieste. And it's my pleasure and honor to be the moderator for this session, which is around the subject of innovation and technology for sustainable development, but which we rather ambitiously entitled How to Save the World, a guide to achieving social, economic, and environmental sustainability through innovation. So why do we give it such an ambitious title? Well, innovation and technology have been blamed for many of the problems in the world today. We all know that there are environmental problems that, at least in part, concerning climate change, are shown to be linked to industrial activity, shown to be linked to the use of fossil fuels, much of which was driven by the Industrial Revolution and by the technologies that innovation brought about. But if we blame innovation for our problems, we're rather missing the point, because we believe that innovation not only can be the cause of problems when the technologies that it leads to are not well managed or are not developed in a sustainable way, but we also believe that innovation is perhaps our only option to have sustainable growth and sustainability in general, if we are to fix the problems that we've created and to bring the world into the kind of equilibrium that would allow us to have sustainable and developing lives in the future. We're confident that that can be done, and it needs to be done through the collaboration between the three pillars of what is sometimes called the triple helix. So it's necessary for government, academia, and industry to play their parts and to have a significant role in ensuring that innovation and future technology development, rather than creating additional problems, help us to solve the problems created in the past and to lead to a sustainable, brighter, better future for all of us. So I'm fortunate today to have with me three speakers who perfectly represent those three pillars. We have with us Nili Shalev, who will be joining us virtually on screen. Nili is Managing Director of ISER, the Israel EU R&D Directorate, and the Israel Innovation Authority, and she will share with us her views with the perspective of someone who has spent many years in active roles in government in Israel, one of the most innovative ecosystems in the world. We also have with us, joining virtually, Albert van Jaarsveld, Director General and CEO of the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis in Luxembourg, Austria. Albert has a wealth of experience in analyzing from an academic standpoint, from a research standpoint, the impact that technology and our activities, industrial activities, can have on the environment, and will give us his take on how we can use research-driven innovation and technology development to lead to environmental sustainability. Our third speaker today, Zeno D'Agostino, unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but we're fortunate to have an able substitute in Alberto Cozzi, who is project manager at the Port Authority, the Port Network Authority of the Eastern Adriatic Sea, or perhaps more simply known as the ports of Trieste and Monfalcone. Alberto is a project manager who will be able to give us his take on how the development of intermodal transport and logistics can facilitate commerce, trade, and industrial activity in a sustainable but economically viable way that can provide jobs and can provide social innovation and activities that lead to economic growth, but in a way that doesn't damage the environment and our world. So I shall, without further ado, introduce our first speaker, and I'm going to give the floor first to Nili Shalev. As I said, Nili is Director General of ESERD, the Israel EU R&D Directorate, the Israel Innovation Authority. As such, she has more than 20 years' experience in representing the Israeli Ministry of Economy and Industry in a wide range of executive positions. She was appointed to her present position in the summer of 2016, and Nili is responsible for the implementation of the Israel-EU Agreement on Research and Development, Horizon 2020, creating support infrastructure and initiating activities for promoting industrial and academic R&D cooperation between Israel and Europe through a variety of multilateral and binational platforms. Nili also has much experience in the financing of innovation, and I'm hoping that she will share with us her perspectives on how policymakers and government can drive innovation, can drive research-led technology innovation, and how the role of research and innovation can help to advance towards a sustainable future, and what will be the obstacles for the adoption of innovative solutions. Nili, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm talking to you from Israel, and probably the best time to show the need for solutions. This week, we are breaking record high heat waves and temperatures in Israel that haven't been seen here in 100 years. So it's a good time to be at home and not outside, but a very good time to stress the need for solutions. So thank you again for having me. And as Steve said, I have quite substantial experience with government support for industrial research and innovation. And the first question we would like to probably tackle is, do we need here innovation? And I think that maybe it's almost trivial, but the one aspect is that needs to be highlighted, that innovation, although is trivial and although needs to be implemented in order to create a change in such a dramatic time, is definitely not the only component needed. So in order to tackle big challenges like we have now in this magnitude and internationally, without a doubt, we need some breakthrough innovation. Breakthrough innovation that will cover many aspects, not only technological aspects, but also regulatory aspects, innovation in services, innovation in processes, innovation in how we manage basically our lives. So innovation has to be very wide here. And I think now when we're looking at Greta Thunberg as an amazing example of a young lady focusing on the need to change the world and the need to be more sustainable. We can also see something that is very, for example, if we're looking at her, at the way she acts, so she took a boat, a sailing boat, if I remember right, to travel from Europe to the US to the UN. So this shows that innovation is, we can't move backwards. We need to move forward, and it's not that we can implement the same ways that she tried to show that to decrease emission, to take a sailing boat from Europe to the US. We can't change our lives. We need to move forward, and in order to move forward and to tackle this massive issue of reducing greenhouse gas emission, we need to introduce innovative solutions across the board and try to implement it. If I'm looking at Israel as some kind of a very small example of how innovation changed the landscape in Israel, and I would like to focus on sustainability, I go back to the English proverb that says that necessity is the mother of invention. So when Israel was basically initiated, this place, this geography was a very arid, desert-like location with very, very limited water resources. And I think that from this perspective, Israel is an example that shows how necessity at the time created inventions and innovation and brought about innovation to tackle climate change and to basically allow lives and sustainable life in this place. And now we see that innovation has brought Israel to a place where it can live a very sustainable life here that is in line with, in most of the cases, in line with sustainability goals that we have. So one example is how we treated water in this region. So we have today we recycle. I think we are the #1 country that recycles 90% of our water resources, and we use it for irrigation. How this is water recycling technologies and water recycling policy. So it's not just the innovation in technology, but also policy was implemented in Israel basically because of a necessity and a need. Another good example is irrigation. In Israel, Israel invented drip irrigation in order to allow local agriculture and allow smart consumption of water. Another good example is solar energy. While we didn't have at the time any natural resources, and regulation was introduced to use solar energy in housing and from a very early stage. So we see how the necessity in Israel basically pushed innovation and forward, and also the implementation of this innovation. I think that now, looking at the situation where we're now today, we hopefully are in the same stressful time that necessity becomes very prevalent, and we need to introduce, and we lead basically to innovation and invention in order to tackle the grand challenge that we face today. But as I said before, at the beginning, so it's obvious that we need innovation, but innovation is not enough. And innovation and technological innovation will not necessarily lead to change. There are, in order for innovation to take place, there are few additional things that needs to happen. First of all, there needs to be an adoption from the society. So society needs to look at this innovation and say, okay, this is something that will something that we can adopt, something that we can adopt widely. It suits the way that we live. It doesn't take us backward, but it moves us forward. And it also has, and it doesn't cost us more than we are willing to pay for this change. And it's not just the adoption locally, the adoption needs to be internationally. One country that adopts, or one society, or one person that adopts innovation is definitely not enough where we're tackling such a huge challenge. So unlike innovation, for example, in different industries, when we look at the pharma industry, when we look at the ICT industry, the internet, the iPhone, and others, and advanced medical solutions and other, here the market is not a natural market. So the market is something that companies will not make currently money out of, and citizens and people will not see, besides, of course, the benefit for the society and the environment, will not see a direct benefit and currently. So we don't see there is not a voluntary trend to pay for the benefit of the environment, and this is a major obstacle, and we see this obstacle also in the investments in the area. So the investments here do not come from, as we can see naturally, from venture capital industry and other angel investors and other. The investment here is more philanthropic, and the investment here is comes also from maybe multinational corporations that see today the need and the need to be more environmentally responsible. So this is another obstacle: the financing of the new technologies and the climate change, and in order to bring to a change. Another obstacle is that here the effort needs to be worldwide. It needs to be global, and there is no one person or one country that can make a difference. But I think here, looking at the EU, this is definitely something that we need to salute to, leading the way in making a change and introducing the Green Deal, introducing substantial financial support for climate change, in relatively a program that has also international collaboration aspects. And I think here we are happy, and we are happy to join this effort, and this is something that definitely can lead the way to a more global and international effort for climate change. So looking at the obstacles, the role of the government here is definitely critical, and especially in areas where we don't see a lot of private investments. Here again, if I want to give a small example from the area that I work in and the place I work in, government support in Israel is for innovation. Government has been a major player throughout the years, and has supported innovation, but traditionally supported research and innovation, so supported financing of research and innovation. So if I look today at the role of the government, is definitely much wider than the support of research and innovation and the financial support of research and innovation. It's wider, but it's still very necessary this support. For 50 years, I can see if I look at the Israeli government, for 50 years we have supported research and innovation in Israel. This is a very stable, long-term support that companies that want to introduce innovation know that they have the government by their side to be the first investor sometime, or the first one to look at the technology, evaluate it, and provide some initial financial support for that. Always, it's not enough for the government to support innovation. You always need the private sector, and if you want to grow companies, the private sector to be there as well. But in areas of sustainability, the government needs to be bolder and needs to take the first risk and needs to support in higher amounts because there is lack of private financing in this space. So besides looking at direct investment to R&D, the government also needs to be an adopter of those technologies. It needs to adopt the innovation, needs to be the first one to test the innovation in its facilities. Many times when we look at innovation in sustainability, we need to provide the infrastructure, and it relates to public infrastructure, and we need, the government needs to look at it, open the doors, and test those technologies. Without allowing these technologies to be tested in public facilities, it's very hard to provide the test cases for these technologies, and it's very hard to adopt them. Because when government also open their facilities to test the technologies, they need to look at the regulation, and they need to modify the regulation in order to provide these, to make sure that these technologies are being supported by the right regulation, if it makes sense, of course, and if it doesn't harm in any way the public. So I think the government here, besides provide funding, besides allowing the testing and the piloting of technologies, need also to look at the broader landscape and see how they can change the regulation in order to support this change. And I think that here, last but not least, the government needs to be very stable and consistent. Look at it as a long-term activity, and provide consistency both in funding and both in testing technologies and both in looking at the regulation and adopting it constantly to allow the implementation of this change. So again, if I want to give an example of things that we do in Israel, and I'm not, of course, we learn all the time also from other countries, and we want to see what others are doing in order to see what we can implement. But just recently, we introduced new programs that we work together, the Israel Innovation Authority, which provides the funding. We work, and we are not a regulatory authority. We wanted to work together with other ministries in order to, first of all, have them adopt innovation, and second of all, allow them to look at innovation and the regulatory change that needs to support this innovation. So today we work with various ministries in Israel, transportation, energy, and others, health, agriculture, in order to facilitate joint programs to look at innovative projects, to pilot them in Israel, and to see how we can support them by making regulatory change that is needed. I think this is a good way to implement change, and implement change that takes us forward and not backwards. So I think this is probably my first comment on, again, why innovation is needed, what are currently the obstacles to implement this innovation, and how governments and what government needs to do in order to support the introduction of innovation. I'm sorry, into society and bring change. So Steve, I hand back to you the mic, and I'm here for the rest of the panel to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neely, and I think that was an excellent exposition of how government's role can be a driving force to make sure that excellent science becomes technological innovation that is adopted in society and can lead to change. We need that breakthrough innovation. We need governance. Governance is critical in this process. We need to have a level playing field between nations. That means international collaboration is absolutely critical as well. And the government often will be, as Neely said, the first investor, but it can't be the only investor. We need to get the private sector involved in that process. The government can perhaps give the private sector a try before you buy opportunity by being the proof of concept financer, but we need the private sector to get involved too. So we'll move on now to the role of academia in this process, and in particular to our next speaker, Dr. Albert van Jaarsveld, who is Director General and Chief Executive of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. And prior to joining the IIASA, van Jaarsveld was Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and President and CEO of the South African National Research Foundation. He's done many years of excellent research himself, but he's also been very active on the international front, advising policymakers. He served as co-chair of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Follow-up Subglobal Assessments, and as a member of the International Council for Science, the ICSU, Nominations Committee. He held positions as Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, Science Focal Point, and chaired the G8 Science Ministers group of senior officials on global research infrastructure. He was chair of the International Group of Funding Agencies, co-chair of the Belmont Forum, and was a member of the ICSU Review Panel and the IPBES External Review Panel. Albert, the floor is yours, and I'd like you to address, if you would, how you see research-driven innovation and technology development leading to environmental sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that introduction, and from my side, thank you for the invitation to participate in this hopefully exciting conversation today. Neely, thank you for setting the scene. We at IIASA would like to contribute in terms of the broader thinking around social, economic, and environmental sustainability in this conversation. This is not to confuse you, but just to remind all of us about the kind of complexities we face and what policymakers and other people have to deal with in their day-to-day decision making. This is not an easy solution, but it really requires some innovative thinking and innovative approaches that we, of course, we at IIASA are of the view that a systems analysis approach is probably one of the best tools we have available to try and tackle this kind of problem that we face. I want to remind everybody, and Stephen referred to it earlier as well, we've benefited as a society from the great acceleration that's taken place over the last 300 years, both in terms of socioeconomic trends as well as Earth system trends. And I think we're starting to understand very clearly that this is not sustainable. And this is not the pathway that's going to take human society forward. And I must say, I sometimes find it quite odd when people are too concerned about the future of the planet. I think the planet will do very well with or without us. I think we should be more concerned about our own future in terms of this journey into the path. So where does humanity find itself at the moment? Just a few reminders. 71% of people on the globe own less than $10,000 in wealth. Poverty trap and income disparities are deepening divisions as we speak. In terms of health, life expectancy has doubled in a century. This is a tremendous achievement. While 1 billion are obese and less of people go hungry. 100 million people suffer from acute hunger in 2018. And of course, the COVID impact is only going to exacerbate many of these trends that we see in front of us. From an environmental point of view, 9 out of 10 people breathe air with high levels of pollutants. 1 in 9 people use water from unsafe sources, and 2.3 billion people lack access to a toilet. 1 million species are facing extinction. From a happiness perspective, more die by suicide than war and violence on an annual basis. Happiness inequality is on the rise across the globe. Everybody in the world has a cell phone, not literally, there are more cell phones than people, but 1 billion people do not have access to electricity to actually charge their cell phones. 3 billion people suffer from land degradation, desertification, and have altogether missed out on the benefits of the Great Acceleration. Clearly, this is not a rosy picture that gives us confidence about the kind of future that we should be pursuing. We launched through IASA and a number of our global research partners, up to 120 scholars from around the world participated in this exercise called The World in 2050. That looked at the sustainability objectives as an intermediate goal, as you see in 2030 there, the SDGs circle. But the world doesn't end in 2030. And we need to go beyond that and really pursue a just, sustainable, and safe future for all into the future. So we've set ourselves a target for 2050. In other words, and to hopefully en route to 2050 achieve the Sustainable Development Goals to the best of our ability. We developed one backcasting narrative. In other words, we started at the ideal 2050 and developed a backcasting narrative. And then through modeling and other exercises, developed a number of transformational pathways that can be pursued by different countries, depending on where they find themselves and what kind of future pathway they see for themselves between now and 2050. So all of these options and opportunities are available and can be explored. One of the things we learned, though, in the process is that to try and deal with the complexity of 17 SDGs that are interlinked, at the same time, try and deal with 169 targets, it's just simply too complicated for us to deal with in terms of making major decision making. What came out of the world in 2050 is that there were 6 major transformations required to achieve all the SDGs as we see them. First of those is human capacity, demography and health. The second is consumption and production. The third is decarbonization and energy, food, biosphere and water, smart cities, and the one thing that's not even mentioned in the SDGs is the implications and the consequences of the digital revolution in this space. But these are the 6 major transformations that came out of the World 2050 project that we feel are critical, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time just on touching on each of these to think about the pathways that we have into the future. This is Thomas Piketty's work on the rise of inequality. There are many ways to try and demonstrate this, but of course this is the traditional approach. This is a significant problem for us. Increasingly we have the haves and the have-nots across the world, and Thomas Piketty in his work and elsewhere, people have demonstrated that this will lead to social unrest and instability into the future. Society is not going to tolerate this indefinitely. And we can choose whether we want that transition to be peaceful, or we can go the alternative route, as was done many times in the past, including the French Revolution, for instance, and other kinds of similar processes. So let's think about this rationally and not just let the inevitable happen. The other issue is that, of course, health, from a health perspective, not everybody benefits equally from the benefits of health systems across the world. And when you have these kinds of disparities, people become extremely unhappy, and I think the consequences will be felt at the political level, one way or the other. And I think we need to be sensitive to the fact that people require a healthy existence to the best of our ability, and we need to be focusing on supplying that as a society. We also understand that people have aspirations to increase the quality of the quality of their lives in terms of their basic needs and, of course, well-being as a society. With these two axes, we have on the left-hand side consumption or service provisioning, as you see it, and on the bottom axis, well-being. As part of the world in 2050, we realized that is of course a natural tendency for people to have access to more and more services over time, but at the same time to also improve their well-being. This can continue, of course, into this direction, which I think is probably unsustainable, and we've demonstrated that repeatedly across the globe. We've hit so many planetary boundaries that we have to tackle. As a basis for this conversation, we defined a basic need. In other words, what do people need to be able to survive? What can be called a decent living standard in that basis? And around that to define what we call a sufficiency corridor. Because clearly, we have to make sure that the society does not go the route of overconsumption into the future in terms of exceeding the basic sufficiency corridor needs. Because if you do that, the chances are that the consumption will still increase, but the well-being is likely to start going in the opposite direction as a society. And so we have to be very careful about how we manage this. The sufficiency corridor is very important and becomes an important part of the future service provisioning environment and, of course, the consumption environment of people across the world. So in order to have a sustainability transformation, it's important that we start having these conversations about consumption and sufficiency. Of course, getting there requires new values and norms, new standards of morality and ethics in the way that we manage society. Is not just going to happen by itself. And clearly, the ongoing consumption-based economies will have to change. For some other reason in societies around the world, we tax those things that we value. Things like jobs, production, and possibly even trade. But we are very poor at taxing the one particular dimension that's going to take us in the wrong direction, and that's consumption. Across the world, consumption taxes are about 16% of the total tax that's collected, or right about at least 16% level, whereas the other three that I just mentioned are taxed up to 50% level across the world. It's precisely the wrong way around. So we're taxing those things that we value very heavily, and we're not taxing the one thing that's going to take us in the
Albert, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I noticed I muted myself. Sorry about that. Okay. This is just to illustrate why consumption is important. This illustrates to you the upstream savings that can be achieved by just downstream small savings. As far as energy is concerned, 1 exajoule of energy saved downstream in terms of demand means that we can produce 7 exajoules of energy less in the system. 1 cubic meter of water saved downstream means that we can withdraw 6 less cubic meters of water. Demand management is extremely important. And also in terms of materials. 1 ton saved of materials means 8 tons less that we have to mine down the line. So demand management and managing at the consumer face is really important. When we think about sustainable solutions and renewables and how we manage that across the world, there are a couple of solutions that we have to think about. One of those is what I call local solutions. This is an example of using local water storage to capture the energy when it's available, either through solar or wind energy, pump the water up into a reservoir, and then let it come down again. And of course, in areas where we don't have water, we could use chemical storage. I know there's a lot of innovations going on in that space at the moment. So yes, local solutions can work, but so can global solutions. In other words, this is a GuideCo initiative driven from China, but one solution would be to shuttle renewable energy around the world very efficiently and effectively from the places where it can be produced at a particular point in time, depending on the sun availability and wind availability, to those places where the demand may be at a particular part of the day. So a global shuttle of renewables is also an alternative way of looking at solutions in this regard. One thing we've learned at IASA is that the adoption of new technologies is critically important. And it's very clear to us from analysis done, and you'll see the reference to the paper, that it is interesting that small-scale solutions are adopted much more quickly quickly by society. Their ability to diffuse into societies is much higher than large-scale government projects and initiatives, or even industry projects and initiatives. So when we think about a rapid change in society, let's make sure that we try and deal with it on a small scale to enhance the local adoption and also the diffusion of the technology across society into the future. Of course, we also have to think about the environment and global sustainability, conservation issues. This work that we did in Brazil with some of the EASA work clearly illustrates that it is absolutely possible to comply with conservation targets across the world, while at the same time intensifying cattle production, for instance, or even the production of croplands in that environment, and to collectively achieve and even enhance the productivity of the agricultural sector in that environment, while actually exceeding the conservation requirements at the same time. It requires decent planning. It's as simple as that. And with decent land use planning and integrated land use planning, these things can be achieved if you look at this thing as a system and not deal with it in a sector-specific manner, and just let ad hoc decisions determine broad scale use patterns across the world. We can do this better than we're doing at the moment. Smart cities, which is another one of the transitions we spoke about, of course, is very important. More and more people are moving into the urban environment across the world. Our understanding of cities as a system is actually quite poor at the moment. We don't really have a good grasp as to what the trade-offs and the possible synergies are that we can exploit in having more sustainable cities in the future. I think this is going to be a key area of work for sustainability. But of course, with the new digital revolution, more and more people are working remotely. I think sometimes in some of the cities we're going to find that people are going to move out of these cities and are not going to be as office-bound as we were in the past in that regard, particularly in some parts of the world, and you've already seen that trend emerge in some developed parts of the world into the future. But we have to understand what this is going to mean for city environments of the future as well. Of course, technology is going to happen. Technological progress is inevitable. We have to deal with it as a society. But of course, it raises issues around political and ethical questions. For instance, we're just going to raise 3 here. Who's responsible for autonomous weapons? And who takes the rap when things go wrong? The same applies to genetic engineering techniques. Of course, many societal questions about what is ethical and unethical in that space. And then I think as a broader society, the thing that we're all worried about, what is the future of work as we know it as a society? How many people are likely to be employed into the future? How much of it's going to be supplanted by technology? And how do we deal with that as a society? So with this kind of background, I want to leave you with a number of key messages that I think are important for future sustainability across the globe. We can achieve the 2030 agenda, but it requires accelerated action and transformative pathways for sustainable development to be dealt with. I think it's nearly indicated to us early, nobody can become sustainable by themselves as a nation. It requires multilateralism and multilateral cooperation and engagement. This is not something you can do as a nation state by yourself, and it's not going to be achieved. Of course, the COVID-19 is a great threat to humanity, but it also provides an opportunity for change and innovation. We've demonstrated societies can change their behavior when we need to. We can respond as a society collectively in our collective benefit. This was considered to be an immovable obstacle a short year ago in terms of the way we manage societies, and we've demonstrated that's not so. Science, technology, and innovation are at the core of human progress. It's been for the last 300 years, and that's not going to change. But they also bring negative impacts, as Neely indicated. They also provide some significant and serious solutions, and we have to cherry-pick the solutions that are in our best interest at the end of the day. Small-scale innovations generally are adopted faster and have more rapid diffusion. That will enable us to make more rapid changes. Will also encourage private sector investments more than we have in that regard, because the big projects are just too expensive and sometimes cannot be supported by small-scale investments. Science policy interface is essential for evidence-based transformations. Research and development are enablers of sustainably orientated innovations and change. Transforming the service provisioning systems is necessary. We have to improve well-being, sharing of resources, but it also requires people-centered approaches that focuses on efficiency and sufficiency in terms of the services we provide, and not just what, in other words, it's about what we need and not about what we want. All right? Resilient enterprises are required. This is a fundamental change in business models that's required for sustainability. To shift from a shareholder-centric perspective to a much stronger stakeholder-centric perspective for businesses. I think the shareholder-driven centric companies are not going to be tolerated by society for much longer. Sustainable human futures, we have to balance efficiency, compound resilience, and sustainability thinking in thinking about new services, trade, health, food and water security regimes into the future. It's really important that we have a balanced perspective. Consumption tax, needs to be increased. Less taxing of the desirables that we want from our economy, and let's tax the undesirables. I think that's the bottom line message here. There's more and more talk about a notion of understanding that we're dealing with global citizenship across the world. It's not just about one country's citizens or another country's citizens, that we have to pursue justice, equity, safety, and a dignified life for all, and the environment. And there's a lot of talk emerging about the notions of a universal income grant. I know that some people balk at that idea, but I think it's something that this conversation is going to increase, and we're going to hear more and more about this into the future when we talk about global justice and dealing with sustainability problems. So, what are we facing? A new era of human history, clearly. We've gone through the Neolithic and industrial and digital revolution is now the era that faces us, and it's going to have a significant impact. We're going to have to deal with it. It's going to be disruptive in many spheres, as we indicated, and the digital Anthropocene is the new era in which we are going to have to function. And we're going to have to find societal solutions, environmental solutions, and technological solutions that ensures that humanity remains on this planet for a lot longer than I think the current trajectories indicate we are likely to survive. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Albert, for that comprehensive view of what the research and scientific community can do to analyze the problem. And I think you gave a great exposition of some of the key challenges that we face, but also the contribution to identifying appropriate solutions and to working towards their implementation on a global scale. I think you gave an excellent summary of those key points, so I won't reiterate all of that, but I think it's worth noting that the scientific community as an international community can play its part in making that happen. I'm going to move straight on to our third speaker so that we have a little time towards the end for another round of some questions. And our third speaker, as I said, is Alberto Cozzi, who's project manager at the ports of Trieste and Monfalcone. Alberto started his studies here in the city of Trieste, although he originates from Udine, which anyone who is local knows is a city that has a great positive relationship with the city of Trieste. He studied international economics, public law and geopolitics, and went on to dedicate much of his time to the specific study of Central and Eastern Europe, living in Poland and studying there for some time, and doing a master's then in Turin, focusing on transport and sustainable mobility in 2004. There he specialized in transport modeling and logistics, local and large area transport planning, and transport and environment issues. And that is something I think he's carried forward in his current role in the port system here in Trieste. After working for a few years in the Central European Initiative, which is another initiative dedicated to European integration through cooperation among its member states, where he drafted, submitted and managed transport-related EU projects, he now is responsible in the Port Network Authority of the Eastern Adriatic Sea for working as a project manager on a number of EU projects in several fields, including infrastructures, innovation, intermodal transport, alternative fuels, ICT and mobility. So Alberto, thank you for being with us today. My question to you, to give you a platform from which to launch your presentation, is how do you see innovative logistics evolving? What will the intermodal transportation of the future look like? And how will this vision facilitate sustainable global trade, environmentally sustainable transport, and continued sustainable economic growth in the world economy. Thank you, Alberto.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I bring you the regards of the President, Mr. D'Agostino, who unfortunately could not be here with us today. This morning I will talk to you about the role of ports, of maritime transport, and innovation and sustainability to this sector. Well, first of all, what is a port? What is a modern port? Modern ports have evolved from being single nodes, simple cargo handling facilities, to local networks, and they now are complex ecosystems. What do these ecosystems look like? In the port area, trade, logistics, manufacturing, added value services converge, and all of this is intertwined into global added value chains. Ports are not only single nodes anymore, but they are included in global corridors. So what is the role of the port? The port aims to be an enabler in the global supply chain with 4 different roles. The role of the global hub, to be included in the global trade flows, an industrial cluster with synergies between different industries, as I said, manufacturing, trade, logistics. Information hub as a facilitator for data exchange among freight transport stakeholders. I will talk about it later. And the World Port City, an area where the development of the port and the development of the area around the port go hand in hand. And in Trieste, the Port of Trieste plays all these roles. It is included in the global trade flows. It has an industrial cluster, but the Port of Trieste Authority also is competent over the industrial area of the Port of Trieste with a free port status. It is an information hub, not only for the port, but also for the stakeholders, and it has a strong cooperation with the city of Trieste. The Port of Trieste is an urban port. We are sitting here in the old port area where the Port of Trieste was born, and the city is just surrounding us. The ports have been integrating together with other networks and terminals in value-driven supply chains, and this has brought several changes. First of all, digital transformation, which is an essential tool in the global supply chain. Then, most importantly, I would say, moving from nodal competition to nodal cooperation. So before globalization, nodes were just competing to each other, but now they are looking for synergies and cooperation, both vertical integration and horizontal integration. And this is taking place in Trieste as well. The Port of Trieste now also has competence on the Port of Monfalcone, which is another port in this region, so horizontal integration, but also now controls 2 dry ports in this region, the dry port of Trieste, which is just 15 kilometers from here, and another dry port in Cervignano, so vertical integration. So what is the role of innovation and sustainability? This is the background of the port, but what is the role of innovation and sustainability? In our point of view, innovation and sustainability are 2 sides of the same coin, and the ultimate goal is efficiency, and both innovation and sustainability contribute to the overall system efficiency. Now I will bring you the example of the Port of Trieste. The Port of Trieste is a use case. So this slide shows the CO2 emissions of the Port of Trieste of 2019, last year. As you can see, almost 73% of the total CO2 emissions come from the maritime side of the port, most notably 65% from ships at berth, so when the ships are moored in the port. But we should not neglect the 27% which comes from landside activities. And the objective of the Port Authority of Trieste Monfalcone is to decrease the overall CO2 emissions of the overall activities, both maritime side and land side, in a 360-degree approach. Which are the best innovations to tackle the CO2 emissions in port areas? Where on the seaside, we have alternative fuels for ships. So for the phase when a ship is on the sea and it arrives at the port. Alternative fuels, the best available technologies now are LNG, which is very good for decreasing air pollutants because LNG almost eliminates particulate matter and decreases very strongly sulfur and nitrates, but still has CO2 emissions. Another latest technology and alternative fuel is hydrogen. But hydrogen technology, at least for maritime transport, is not mature enough at present. And there is still the issue of how hydrogen is produced. If it is produced with renewable sources, then we have green hydrogen. But if it is produced with oil and gas, let's say, then there's not much of a point of using hydrogen. And for ships at berth, we have cold ironing. So the possibility for ships to switch off their engines while they are in the port and be connected to the electrical grid. But even in this case, we have some challenges to be tackled. One of them is the electrical grid. For instance, the electrical grid in the city of Trieste, in this part of the region, is not powerful enough to accommodate all the ships and all the energy which would be needed if all the ships were to be connected to the grid at the same time. And also, the other topic is the energy cost, because now energy is more expensive than the normal fuel that is used by ships. On the land side, the best technology for reducing the environmental impact is the very old technology, which is rail. And we are proud to say that the Port of Trieste is the first port in Italy for intermodal transport. We managed almost 10,000 trains last year, but most importantly, we have a high modal share of rail transportation, 56% of TEUs, so of containers, and 29% of semi-trailers, so of trucks. We have, of course, e-mobility, but also the refurbishment of buildings. So looking at really 360 degrees. But overall, we have ICT, which plays an important role both for the maritime and also for the land side aspect of CO2 emissions. We are now we are already in the third industrial revolution. The first was about steam, the second one was about internal combustion engines, and the third one is about data and information. This also applies in the maritime sector and in the port sector. The main IT tool is the Port Community System, the PCS, which is an IT platform to which all the stakeholders are connected, from customs to phytosanitary control, private operators, and so on and so forth. But as we saw, the ports are not only nodes, but they're also connected to the outer world in a global supply chain. So the Port Community System must become a port system community system. And this is also taking place here in Trieste. Our PCS is now connected to foreign railway undertakings that arrive in the port of Trieste and also to foreign dry ports, for instance, in Hungary. And we are really looking forward to being able to use artificial intelligence in the future to manage the big data. But we still have some lessons to learn and some challenges to win, which the COVID-19 crisis posed us. First of all, on digitalization. So I said that digitalization is one of the key drivers for sustainability. That is true. And COVID-19 really showed us how vulnerable paper-based and person-based transactions are, especially in the port-shore interface, I would say. And although it is an important tool, we have to acknowledge that, for instance, the latest statistics show that only 49 out of the 171 member states of the International Maritime Organization have declared that they have ports connected to the PCS. So there is still a long way to go in order to bring world ports to a basic minimum standard. And then we have to manage black swans, like the COVID-19 is. We need to develop long-term business continuity strategies and policies, tackling not only events such as a pandemic, but most probably also cyber attacks. The more we digitalize the maritime sector and the economy, the more we are object of cyber attacks. But luckily, COVID-19 has not stopped the momentum for decarbonization. If you remember, before COVID-19, everybody was talking about the Green New Deal, how this would have been applied, the funds for it, and so on and so forth. What the maritime sector needs, basically, is clean fuel to be available in all the ports in the world. And this requires huge investments in the fuel supply chain. According to latest estimation, in order to decarbonize maritime transport, 85% of the investment have to be done on the land side, not on the ship side. And the main question is, who is going to pay for this? Who is going to fund these huge investments which are needed in this economic crisis due to the COVID-19? Looking ahead, looking at the future, the greatest innovation, from my point of view, is a new mindset. It is true that, and it is a reality, the ports are not individual nodes anymore, but they are part of global supply chains. But one thing is the reality, one thing is embracing the reality and acknowledging it. All the port and maritime sector needs to acknowledge and embrace this reality and change the mindset, looking forward and looking around ourselves. And this means building trust and cooperation, especially in ICT sector. Digitalization is not about technology. Technology is not an issue. The issue is about the willingness to share data among stakeholders, and for this you need trust building. Investing on ICT innovation in all sectors and choosing the most suitable and most economically viable decarbonization strategy, which might differ from one port to another. If we do all this, if the maritime and port industries do this, then we can assure value to shippers and logistic operators, which means keeping the competitive edge that each port has, means bringing prosperity to the region and areas around the port, but also the protection of the environment for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto, for that vision of an integrated transport and logistics system, which will be a backbone for future global trade. And global trade is one of the things that has led to the levels of prosperity that we see around the world today. And if it were to suddenly stop, as Nili said, we can't really imagine global trade proceeding on sailing ships, as Greta Thunberg used to cross the Atlantic. The timing simply wouldn't be viable and economically viable. But if we can move towards a carbon neutral, integrated intermodal logistics system that permits global trade on a scale that allows continued economic growth and prosperity, then we can really start to imagine global trade that is sustainable over the longer term and provides access to developing nations to those more evolved markets in Western Europe, in North America, in parts of Asia, where trade with those nations, for the developing nations, represents an opportunity for them to increase living standards and move towards that kind of inclusive, sustainable industrial development that the United Nations has promoted for some time. So thank you for sharing that vision with us. As we do have some time for questions, I'm going to throw the floor back to Nili Shalev. Nili, I hope you're still with us. And I'd like to extend on some of the points which you made earlier, because you gave a very good exposition of some of the things that need to be done and the way that they need to be done. So I'd like you to perhaps revisit some of those ideas, but specifically looking at some of the obstacles that prevent private industry from investing in early stage green technology and how we can attract more private funding into that system. And then perhaps spend a couple of minutes on how research and research-led innovation and technology development can provide sustainable alternatives to traditional industries that can help retain jobs and provide sustainable economic growth and social stability as well. So I think you can take about 6 or 7 minutes, Nili, on that if that's okay for you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the very interesting presentations in the panel. I think it completed very nicely the picture, and maybe I'll refer also to a few of the points that were made. So what we see today, at least in the Israeli landscape of private investments in sustainability, I would say, is that we see less and less private money goes into climate change issues. But when I look at, if I want to refer to what Albert said, ICT and digital transformation, of course, maybe is not exactly, we don't look at it as exactly the same. So digital transformation and the implementation of digital solutions, when we see it in transportation, in maritime, and in others, of course, has a market, and anything that has a market will have private investors behind it. So this is obvious, and it was interesting to hear the adoption of solutions locally, that solutions can be adopted locally, and it's true, and quite fast can be adopted locally, but I think it's only partially true for particular solutions that make good, that creates benefit to the population or to people, and people see it as beneficial for them and for the sustainability of the system as well. So excluding ICT and AI, for example, that also creates a lot of efficiency in processes, we see less and less private money goes into energy, water, and things that are not necessarily a digital change, but a physical.
Lily, I think we lost your microphone.
Okay, I hope you lost me not long ago.
Just for a second.
Just for a second. Okay, so again, we see money, of course, in digital ICT. It's fast transformation. There is adoption in some areas, and infrastructure, digital infrastructure, if we look at ports, will probably take longer to be adopted than things that relate to our private life. But still, what we see, at least in Israel, is a trend of private money goes more into ICT and less into technological changes in energy, water, and infrastructure activity, which is also needed or badly, crucially needed to make a transformation in sustainable transformation. And if here, in order to try to, and maybe the trend, and I mentioned it before, is not, so venture capital money doesn't go there, angel investment money, of course, let's go to those areas because it takes longer, because adoption is longer, because the markets are not really there, but we do.
Sorry, we lost your microphone again, Nili. Nope. We seem to have lost the connection with Nili there just for a second. So while we're fixing that technical problem, perhaps I'll go back to...
Okay.
Oh, here we are, Nili. There you are. Thank you.
Oh, you can hear me now. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So just to continue quickly on that, we see multinational companies do invest in technology change, in technology innovation, and take the responsibility there. So there is the private funding that goes, but we do need to attract more private funding besides philanthropic money that goes into that. And I think here, again, government policy, stable government policy and support is crucially important, and it shows both the innovators, the entrepreneurs, and the private funding that the government looking at it as a long-term necessary investment, And in this way, we'll try to attract more private money or shift it to work together with corporations to bring a change, corporations and authorities, etc., to bring a change. If I'm looking, and again here, this is definitely a major issue to be tackled worldwide, is digital transformation and how it affects the work. And I think without a doubt, this is the way that traditional industries and manufacturing industries needs to go. We need always to move forward. We can't stay as we are, and we can't move backwards. We may change how we consume, which is, I think, a very challenging thing to achieve. But manufacturing facilities will not be able to be sustainable and compete if they don't change and they don't introduce innovation. I think what we see also, that manufacturing facilities or industries that introduce innovation at the long run, or even not so at the long run, even at the short run, becomes more, increase their revenues and grow. So there is a clear correlation between innovation and growth in revenues. Traditional industries need to introduce it to spur growth. The innovative companies also grow faster than traditional industries. I think even PwC showed a 38% growth in 3 years for innovative if you introduce innovation, as opposed to 10% growth if you do not introduce innovation. So this is a must. In addition to that, the government and the companies need to see how you can transform and how you can provide digital skills to the workforce, and to try and find the new jobs needed in this new reality, in order not to increase the societal or the socioeconomic problem that it can create. So definitely it needs to go hand by hand, but I think that there is no way to avoid introducing innovation into these industries. Otherwise, they will cease to exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Nili. And you made those points very clearly. Despite a couple of technical issues with the microphone, we were able to hear everything that you said. And so thank you for making those points very clearly. And you touched on a couple of things that I'd also like Albert to expand on. You talked about the need to reskill young people to face some of these challenges. As some traditional jobs will disappear, new jobs will emerge and will need to be developed. And Albert, I'm coming back to you, Albert von Jaarsveld, to maybe look at some of the environmental challenges that we face and how technology and innovation can help us address them, but also the role of the education system in helping to develop some of the skill sets that Nili touched on in her comments just now, and some of the things that you highlighted that we need to address if we're going to prepare ourselves and prepare the global manufacturing economy, the global industry, and global society to face some of those challenges. So you talked about reducing demand, and I think the introduction of targeted taxation to address that is certainly one of the methods that has been experimented in a few narrow areas in the past and may need to be extended in the future. And also your reference to scientists studying renewable energy production and distribution, and I think the way in which some of those emerging technologies will need to be developed further, implemented, and then maintained across the globe is going to be a challenge, and I think we're going to need to develop some new skill sets there. So Albert, if I can throw the floor back to you and ask you to touch on some of those points in about 6 or 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll try my best. That's quite a meal, but let's see what I can touch on. I think in terms of the priority environmental issues we have to tackle, I think that everybody has a sense of what they are. We know the climate is on our doorstep and has already moved into the front room of many societies, and I think we can't walk away from that. But I think there are a number of other issues that we mustn't forget about in the process. Climate is not the only problem we have. We have a couple of them in that space. And I want to highlight water security around the world. I think it's probably the hand-in-glove problem with climate that we have to tackle around the world. There are going to be many health issues that we have continued to tackle, and I want to mention things that are unrelated to the pandemic, that are scourges of many developing communities around the world. One of those is air pollution. I think many people die from air pollution and sanitation. I think those are two key issues in the health environment that we have to tackle. And then I think in the broader scale, in terms of the conservation, the planet and so on, the complete lack in majority of societies of unplanned or unstrategic land use planning in terms of the way they use. It's like we just become the victims of small decisions as societies and have to just deal with it. I think we have to overcome that. If you talk about the technologies and what we have to do to deal with these things, to be honest, Stephen, I think for every one of these that I mentioned, we know exactly what we will have to do. What is missing is a lack of societal drive and political will to tackle these issues. The technologies are there, the technologies are available, we know what we have to implement, we know what we have to do in the renewable space, and many societies are taking the lead. I think the European Union was mentioned by Nelly earlier. We can do that and we know what to do. We need to tackle these things and do them collectively in the best interest of our entire globe, but the human society as a whole. In the same way that COVID could have been tackled if we worked together rather than necessarily trying to tackle with individually as nation states. So I think there's a lesson to be learned there for trying to deal with these issues. In terms of the new skill sets that are required, clearly, I think the skill sets are going to evolve much more rapidly. And the majority of education systems across the globe are still training people for the economy in which we currently live, and they should be training people for the economy that's coming over the horizon. And I think there are very few institutions and very few curricula that are established that actually looks at the coming economies over the horizon. And I think we would have a significant retooling and reskilling required across economies to deal with that. But of course, if the response is too slow, we know what industry is going to do. They're going to automate much quicker and much faster. And so we have to understand that there are going to be consequences. I don't think that the future of employment is ever going to be the same way it was before COVID, ever again across the planet. And we have to come to think about different ways of using the skills and the available human resources that we have. That's why I think the notion of a universal income grant that could be taxing those automated industries to support human livelihoods is something that we have to think about into the future as well. But that doesn't mean that people should sit on their backsides at home. I think people can provide community service, and there are other ways of trying to make sure that they can make a positive contribution to society into the future. So that's just some of the issues that I think are tangential to this conversation. But clearly in terms of training and skilling needs, what has become really clear, particularly in the area of sustainability and trying to drive the sustainability agenda, is we have to overcome the short-term political 5-year horizons in terms of decision making. There needs to be long-term strategic planning that informs not only the private sector but also government and the society as a whole. But at the same time, we also have to understand that the way that we do science can no longer be in the sort of traditional ivory tower mode, particularly when it comes down to issues around sustainability that directly affect communities. So in that space, I think that the science has to change. The way we do science has to change. We have to engage with communities. We have to engage with citizens. They have to be part of the design of research that's required. They have to be part of formulating the priorities that are required in a particular society. And they have to be party to the implementation of what we put on the table at the end of the day. So just some thoughts, Stephen, around the broad issues that you raised.
Thanks very much, Albert, for those very enlightening comments, and I appreciate your participation today. I'd like to move back to our third and final speaker, Alberto Cozzi, Alberto, I'd like you to just spend a couple of minutes, if you would, with some reflections on how you see the evolution of the economic system on a global scale, the global commercial economy, which is based traditionally on global trade that has used, let's face it, not very sustainable approaches, but hopefully using some of the approaches and visions that you outlined, that will change in the future. But do you see light at the end of the tunnel? The global economy has taken a significant hit during this COVID emergency, and I don't think anyone's predicting a rapid response and recovery from that. But looking further ahead to the medium to longer term, how do you see the evolution of the global economy in a sustainable context, and one that will be more inclusive also for developing nations?
Well, we have to be optimistic, don't we? I think that we have no other option. Even though we are living, it is true, we are living in a very difficult moment and very testing times. Before COVID-19, we were recovering from the 2008-2009 financial crisis. In a few days, we will have the anniversary, the sad anniversary of that crisis. On September 15th, 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. Now we have the COVID-19 pandemic, together with geopolitical tensions around the globe, affecting global trade, for instance, between US and China, but also between US and Europe and US and other countries. We have traditional trading blocks which are dividing apart. Brexit is one of the examples, together with the usual, let's say, volatility of the markets, of financial markets, and on the maritime sector. And actually, I think that global trade were already severely impacted by the financial crisis of 12 years ago, even because I think that at least the Western world came out of the crisis a little bit wary of the alleged benefits of global trade, free trade, consumerism, and also free movement of people. Given that the situation is this one, and it's not a positive one, we're not back in the 60s anymore, trying to look at the future, I don't think there is one single innovation, one single magic wand that will improve the situation, even after COVID-19 crisis has ended, hopefully with the vaccine in the months to come, because it's a complex problem, and complex problems require complex solutions. This is why I think what we need to do, and what we were supposed to do during the COVID-19 lockdown months, maybe we didn't do that, not our governments, not ourselves, is thinking about a recovery plan, thinking about a multifaceted approach that takes into consideration not only innovation, also applied to the maritime sector. The maritime sector has to change and has to contribute to the environmental protection like all the other sectors of the economy, but also new business models which might be required, and I would say most importantly social innovation, because the last thing that we need now is further social unrests.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for your final comments. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes now to sum up and make a few observations on what I think have been three very thought-provoking presentations and answers to the questions that we've tried to address today. I think it's become increasingly evident in recent years that the world faces some significant problems, or rather, the human race faces some significant problems. I think Albert was the first to make the observation that the world will go on very nicely without us. The question is, do we want to create a world in which we have a sustainable future? And I think Nili made it very clear that we have the tools to do that. Government and policymakers are able to intervene, to help to regulate and drive innovation, technology development, research-driven innovation in such a way that it can address societal challenges and societal problems. But we need that governance, not just at the local or the national level, but on an international scale. And again, Albert made the point very clear that if we are to have significant change moving forward, we need a more global approach. We need a responsibility to be absorbed at every level of society, and we need that responsibility to be taken to the international level. We've heard about many of the challenges that we face. Health challenges are at the forefront of everyone's mind because we're living through a pandemic. But as Albert said, there are other health challenges beyond the pandemic itself. There are persistent health challenges facing the world, some primarily challenges in the developing world, some diseases which we still haven't managed to defeat despite exciting victories such as the recent eradication of polio. But we are facing also challenges, health challenges in the developed world. Albert mentioned obesity. So while part of the world's population goes hungry, another part of the population is in a state of obesity, which is bad for their health and demonstrates a poor equilibrium and management of resources in our society. We need that societal drive, that political will that has come out again and again, to be put at the forefront of our decision making. And that means we as citizens, and in particular on the occasion of ESOF, we need to remember that we, the scientific and research community, need to be at the forefront of putting those issues on the table. Evidence provision is a key part of the role of the research community, and our educators need to be educating our young people in a way that is objective and evidence-based, giving them the tools that they need to make better decisions themselves and to expect better decisions from their policymakers. We need that vision of our future that encompasses all aspects of sustainability. Environmental sustainability has increased in visibility in recent years, but it isn't enough for us to work on combating climate change, guaranteeing biodiversity, making sure that we address challenges such as water scarcity in the future. We also need to make very concerted efforts to drive social innovation, to make sure that we address poverty, to make sure that we address social injustice and inequalities. Because if we don't, then as Alberto said, we are facing social challenges that will be every bit as difficult for us to face as a global society and economy as the environmental or health challenges that we're facing today. We need to make sure that economic prosperity doesn't become a distant memory, but can be a goal and an ambition for future generations. And to do that, we need to act now to make sure that everything we do to provide economic growth is done in a sustainable way with a vision for long-term inclusive industrial development and sustainable industrial development that will provide a sustainable future for all of us. I'd like to thank those who are present here in Trieste and also all of you who are watching us from your various locations around the world. ESOF is a great opportunity to engage with the global scientific community, and later on today I'll be taking part in a session at 6 o'clock when we will be taking forward some of the lessons learned in this session and some of the things that have been discussed throughout the event to talk about how that sense of responsibility that has come out very strongly from this session needs to be addressed at a global scale, and what we as individuals, as citizens, as societies can do to make sure that the policymakers and our representatives at an international level engage and take very seriously our human duties, those things which bind us together in respect for each other's human rights. There are duties which we must all accept, and that as nations we must take on board and strive to work together to make sure that we provide opportunities for sustainable growth for all of humanity, now and in future generations. So thank you once again, everybody. It's been an honor and a privilege to chair this session. Thank you to our three speakers, to Nili Shalev, to Albert van Jaarsveld, and to Alberto Cozzi. It's been my privilege to share this hour and a half with the three of you, with our guests here in the auditorium, and with the rest watching on the web. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the ESOF.